now my job basically to continue this line of thoughts about smart cities. You've learned from Professor Profumo that the citizen, that means we, or in other words you, will be in the center of the future city. And the question is, how can we get there? How can technology enable us to become the center of the city? How can we participate in the future course and development of cities? So FuturICT has actually been pretty much engaged in smart cities from the very beginning. So you can see over here this beautiful paper that Mike Betty and others have authored. And here is another paper titled Towards Sustainability of Complex Urban Systems Through Techno-Social Reality Mining. So you can see already that real-time data will be really important for this. So why do we need to take action at all? Well, let's take this quote, for example, of Sandy Pendant, a really famous professor of MIT Media Lab. He said, "Our financial, transportation, and health system are broken. We can't anymore do business as usual." And of course, we have all the best intentions and goals. So we want to have livable and lovable cities, better mobility, less pollution, less noise, and less traffic, for example. But this is what we usually get. So the reality looks different, and there are really big challenges ahead of us, and it requires smart scientists like you to turn these cities into smart cities. The question is, what are the problems? Why haven't we solved the problem so far? And a lot of this has to do with the complexity of systems, and in particular with the dynamics within complex systems. And this dynamics can be unstable. So, as you see over here in this movie, sorry, so I have to restart the PowerPoint presentation. Takes a second. I have no idea where actually the screen is. That's the wrong one. And this is the right presentation. And we have been here. So hopefully now the video will play. So now you can actually see this issue. So cars are driving in a circle. It's not a difficult task, actually, you would think. And actually, for some time it works quite well. But then we'll see a small perturbation in the flow. And this perturbation in the flow actually amplifies. As you can see now, we have a traffic jam. And this traffic jam propagates backwards, as we know it from real traffic flows. Now, this can take forever. And the question is, why did it happen? Why do we have this traffic jam over here? And many people would say, look, there was a stupid driver in front of me who didn't know how to drive a car. However, we have a mathematical model of these kind of phenomena. This tells us something else. It tells us that if the density exceeds a certain threshold, or if the distance between cars falls below a certain critical distance, then traffic becomes unstable, and the slightest variation in the speeds can be amplified, because drivers respond with a delay to changes in the speed of the vehicle ahead, and then they have to brake a little bit harder, actually, in order to compensate for this delay. And that amplifies the small speed variation. And it propagates from one driver to the next, to the second next, and so on. So we have a chain reaction, and in the end, cars get stopped, although no driver wants this to happen. This is actually a very good example for systemic instability that shows that even if people have the best intentions, if they have good skills, good technology, and the information it seems to take to solve the problem, it may might not actually work out. If you have a systemic instability, the system will get out of control sooner or later, no matter how hard you try. So you shouldn't operate the system in this machine. Another example are pedestrian flows. Under normal conditions, you can see this wonderful separation of lanes of walking. So the opposite directions are separated from each other. And you say, okay, it's like Adam Smith's invisible hand. There is this self-organization that creates a beautiful order and an efficient state. However, when the density gets too high, the situation gets out of hand, and you can have a crowd disaster where many people die, although nobody wants to harm anyone. So again, this can only be understood as an outcome of the systemic instability. Things become even more complicated in networks. So there we can have cascade effects. A single failure can actually cause multiple failures in the neighborhood, and this even more. And this is not just a theoretical possibility. This experiment is actually illustrating the dynamics very well. It gives you an idea that a local perturbation can really mess up the entire system. Now this experiment has been designed to show the dynamics actually in a nuclear bomb or a nuclear reactor. So we know that these chain reactions can be controlled by technology, but they're difficult to control. As Chernobyl and Fukushima have shown, sometimes things are getting out of control. So it's very difficult to design these kind of network systems in a way to behave stable. But we have network systems all over the world today. And particularly the financial system is such a network system. And here, this is a real-life example of a cascade effect where the failure of a single bank triggers the failure of hundreds of other banks, eventually. And in the end, hundreds of billions of dollars are lost by this cascade effect. In fact, Eddie Helbing, so the Bank of England, has looked into data and he's shown that the networking in the banking system has increased dramatically from 1985 to 1995 to 2005. And so that could very well have been the cause for the vulnerability of the financial system, causing this meltdown in 2008. But we have similar problems actually also in our electrical network. So power grids can have blackouts, as we know. They happen both in the United States and in Europe, and all over the world. Similar things are seen, but the shocking thing is that in this case, that happened in November 4, 2006. A local failure in Germany has caused blackouts all over Europe, even in Spain and in Portugal. And how can that happen? So we can only understand it actually in terms of complex dynamical networks. And here is a simulation. Which shows that failure in Spain, it's just the other way around, that can cause a major blackout actually in Eastern Europe. Something that you wouldn't think. And as you can see over here in Spain, light is still up and running, while in Eastern Europe, a lot of the electricity network has gone down. So you wouldn't think these kind of things, and this shows you that complexity science is really important to run these kinds of systems in the future. Things are even more complicated because of complex interdependencies between different kinds of networks. So the blackout has an impact on traffic, it has an impact on communication, it has an impact on the water system, on gas supply, and many other things. And so we need to pay much more attention actually to the interdependencies and the implications of this. In fact, the World Economic Forum has created a risk interconnection map, and it shows actually that by now socioeconomic risks are the biggest risks in the world. We have looked into this a little bit more. So we've studied disasters and the cascade effects that happen in real disasters for earthquakes, for thunderstorms, for volcano outbreaks, and all sorts of disasters. And you can see that there is really an extremely complicated interdependency, but still, knowing these interdependencies can help you to prepare for disaster because you know what would happen next and what could happen as a second next feature in these events of cascades. And one of the examples that has become very well known was this earthquake in Japan that caused a tsunami, I mean another natural disaster, which then caused also the meltdown in Fukushima. So this is actually not untypical that one disaster causes another one. And these kind of things can be well understood actually. So as a result, we need to build more resilient systems. And this can actually be done. First of all, we need to understand the drivers of systemic risks. First of all, to save money, we often reduce redundancies in the system. We increase the level of networking in the system. We increase complexity over time, often unintentionally, but it happens. Then the dynamics is actually increasing, and also the pace of innovation is pretty high. So what can we do? First of all, we can come up with backup strategies. We can try to simplify systems. We can try to limit system size. We can reduce connectivity, or we can come up with decoupling strategies. We could increase diversity, which often increases robustness. And we can do real-time measurements and adaptive feedbacks in order to stabilize the system. What also seems to be important is transparency and awareness, accountability, and responsibility. That means things that seem to be soft factories, but that matter actually quite a lot. And having suitable incentives and creating collective intelligence, that would be also interesting challenges. And in fact, within the FuturICT community, there has been quite a bit of activity along these lines. For example, Professor Helbing's team has looked into electricity networks and how these could be modified slightly to improve their stability. That means to reduce their vulnerability. Another important point is to introduce engineered breaking points to stop cascades. And that would be in particular important also for the financial system, because obviously we haven't been able to stop those cascades efficiently. Altogether, for all large-scale networks, we need to have such engineered breaking points. We've also been interested in the European gas supply and its resilience recently, and we've seen that it's actually a very important subject. And it turns out that fairness principles would be important to manage a crisis in case one of the suppliers wouldn't deliver gas anymore to Europe. And finally, I'd like to mention also our work on ground disasters and how to prevent them. So a few years back, actually, the situation was almost not manageable. And in fact, there were many ground disasters that killed thousands of people in the past, over the years. But then, in 2007, the whole area in Mina, which is close to Mecca, has been reorganized. And first of all, a real-time flow monitoring was introduced, and an adaptive rerouting, and many other things like contingency plans, awareness plans, and so on and so on. but what is really important to have is real-time information that allows you to respond in real time to the situation, to stabilize it. So now, what is really exciting is that data and computers can help us to master these problems much better than in the past. And this is where you come in. This curve illustrates that very well. This is basically Moore's law, and it shows you how processing power has increased over time. And in fact, you could be scared by the circumstance in about 10 to 15 years, processing power will overtake the capacity of the human brain. On the other hand, the world has become too complicated to understand it. And so from that point of view, it's maybe good to have systems in the future that would be more intelligent. But I'll come back to the issue of the collective intelligence later on, because a single supercomputing system will not be the solution for the world, as I will explain. Also, we have way more data. So, big data about human activities now enables us to identify the roots of the problems and also to find better solutions. And we can actually create new instruments to explore the world. And this is what FuturICT has actually proposed. This is important because there's a huge economic value also in using these kind of data. We're talking about the oil of the 21st century. As we know, Europe doesn't have much oil. It has intelligent brains, and hopefully we'll have good data in the future to help the interest of the citizens. And so what did we propose? First of all, to build what we call a planetary nervous system in order to have a real-time picture of the world. And then use the data for computer simulations in order to be able to look into different kinds of scenarios, to explore possible decisions and actions in advance and see their potential side effects, identify opportunities and risks. And finally, very importantly, build a global participatory platform that would allow everyone to engage, to contribute, to interact, and to collaborate. And then we start with the planetary nervous system, which was intended to create tailored measurements, because this is even better than data mining and machine learning. And the idea is basically to measure the social footprint, to measure social capital, the fabric of our society. So what keeps our society together, the underlying forces. And to do that basically by using sensor networks. And in fact, we could just use smartphones and connect them with each other in order to come up with collective measurements. And we'll come back to this later on. And then the idea is basically to put these data together to get a picture of the world. And which is nicely animated over here can actually be done, as I will show you in the next video. So here, colleagues of mine have actually downloaded pictures from Flickr, from the Colosseum in Rome, and there are thousands of pictures, and can basically put them together. So we see whether people have been standing who took the pictures, and this is a 3D reconstruction of the Colosseum. You can do that from home. And so in principle we can reconstruct the entire world from the huge amounts of information that are out there on the internet. So why don't we do that? This could be used actually to learn about social capital, which is the basis of social well-being and also economic prosperity, reputation and trust, solidarity, compliance, happiness. All of this is much more important than we often think. The Living Earth Simulator then would not plan to build a crystal ball, but to make us aware of opportunities and risks and to design better manageable systems. And how would we do this? So here is a video.
Today's high population densities and intense mobility increasingly threaten to push epidemics to pandemic proportions. The costs of such pandemics can be immense: countless fatalities, untold physical and emotional pain, soaring healthcare costs, and supply chain disruptions. Now, with GLEAN, we can analyze how infections may spread globally and assess the best ways to minimize their impact. By combining epidemic models with real-world data. GLEAN produces simulations of the global spread of infectious diseases by integrating 3 layers. The first layer looks at people and their geographic distribution with respect to major transportation hubs. The second layer adds data on the mobility of the people, how they commute, and travel around the globe. The third and final layer adds the epidemic model, which can define complex disease scenarios and response strategies such as vaccination campaigns or emergency travel restrictions. Combining these 3 layers, GLEAN simulates epidemic spread at a worldwide scale. The resulting forecasts and scenario analyses help inform on how best to counter pandemic threats. Visit cleanvis.org to learn.
Okay, so here you can see how useful it is to bring together different kinds of data sets and to combine those with models. So you can come up actually with predictive results and with tools that help you to assess difficult scenarios and support you in your decision making. And altogether we would like to scale it up to many more problems. So we'd like to integrate traffic production, economic, social models, scale them up to global scale, and then eventually increase the degree of detail, as that happened actually for the weather forecasting system as well. And then there could be actually specific applications, such as the Transport and Logistics Observatory, or we could also call it the Smart Cities Observatory. And some of the applications are presented over here, like disaster response, where it has been assumed that a certain area cannot be used for any reason actually, and so you have to reroute traffic and to find a way of handling the situation. Perhaps you also need to have extra capacity for emergency vehicles and so on, which needs to be reserved. So there are tools for this, and some of them have been developed also in my own team. But besides creating a mirror world, we can also establish interactive virtual worlds to explore new socioeconomic mechanisms, such as different financial architectures, and see which one would be actually more robust, which ones would be unstable. So we could identify, before the implementation in the real world, what would be better mechanisms. And in fact, people are now using interactive games, so-called series games, to explore people's behaviors, and there are also laboratory environments that have been now scaled up to web experiments in order to learn more about human decision making and how they might also trick the system. I mean, this is also important to know. So if you want to contribute to this, you're very welcome. Unfortunately, big data is not a universal solution. We need to be aware of this. So we will certainly have more and more data, and some people think we can create something like a God's eyes view. But look at these curves over here. The blue curve corresponds to the processing power, doubling every 18 months. The green curve corresponds to the data volume. It doubles even faster every 12 months. So that means within just 2 years we produce as much data as in the entire history of humankind. The red curve shows systemic complexity, and that is actually growing much faster because it's a factorial function. And these curves have certain really important implications. So we're coming from a time where we didn't have enough data to take good decisions, and entering a time where big data allows us to take evidence-based decisions. However, as you can see, the data volume curve separates more and more from the processing power, so there's an increasing gap, and we'll not be able to process all data anymore. And it really matters what kind of data are we looking at. It might easily happen that we're paying too much attention to some issues and overlook other issues instead. And that happens more often than you think. Just remember the ISIS fighters. Nobody was talking about that 4 weeks ago, I believe. But suddenly they're there, they're conquering Iraq, they're conquering Syria, how can it happen that nobody noticed? And this is just one example. Now, as systemic complexity increases, not even all these data will be able to help us to do a real-time optimization of these kind of systems. So top-down control will be increasingly less efficient. And this is interesting. The question is, how can we respond to this? And why does complexity increase so much? Well, that's actually related to cultural evolution, to differentiation in our economy. So it's a natural process. We cannot stop it, and also we don't want to stop it. So we need to find new solutions. And here's just one example. Berlin-Brandenburg Airport. Nobody manages to get it running. Nobody has noticed. Maybe it's just the level of complexity that's too big to be managed in the classical way. So what can we do? As complexity increases, if we want to achieve our goals, we need to increase the level of autonomy. And how could it look like? So classically, if we look into disaster response management, we have a military hierarchy of basically hierarchy of information flows and commands. So somebody tells other people what to do, and those people tell again other people what to do. I've now been in San Francisco, and we had a hackathon on earthquake resilience. It was very interesting what we came up with, given the new information technologies that are now available. There's an entirely new concept how to respond to disasters. And it would look as follows. So the government would say, okay, look, we need that much water, we need that much food, we need it over there, we need that much gas, and so on. And it would be posted on some web page or whatever in an information system, and then people can sign up and say, okay, I'm willing to help. I can contribute that much water. I have that much fuel. I have a car that I can provide. Whatever, So you would bring together supply and demand. You would bring together top down and bottom up in new ways. And this is exactly what we need to do in cities as well. So I recommend you to read a book by Washburn, who was actually the chief city designer of New York City. And I've seen a talk by him. It was extremely interesting. He said, look, I couldn't control anything, but I could influence everything. And it was very important, he said, that top-down and bottom-up came together in new ways to come up with better solutions. So read the book, The Nature of Urban Design. And then also, participation is really important. So it allows people to take better informed decisions and allows them to contribute to their neighborhood, to society, the economy, and to value generation. Now, the need of more participation follows from the need to move towards a more distributed control and decentralized management of increasingly complex systems. So there's no other way to solve this problem, and that's also why everybody says, we need more inclusion, we need more participation. The question, how are we doing this? And new information systems are providing this opportunity. Just to give you an idea of the power of participation, take OpenStreetMap. It's more up to date than Google Street Map, because there is 1.5 million voluntary contributors who feed in data every day. And this is how OpenStreetMap develops. So you can see it starts in London, UCL actually, and then within just a few years actually, the entire world is mapped out by the citizens. And this is information that can be used by the citizens and by everyone. So this is really a fascinating development. And here is another example which was developed also within the FuturICT framework, which is an application that helps people to be more safe during mass events. So everybody has a smartphone, and there's an app which basically tells you what's happening, where, how to get there, and so you can see GPS traces of people are agglomerated to find out how crowded is the situation. This information then anonymously goes to the police, so they would have an overview and know where they need to take action in order to guarantee safety. But also, as we'll see in just a few seconds, this information is fed back to the app of the user and will tell the user, what are the areas that they should better avoid and what would be alternative routes. So, this is kind of overcrowded subway congestion. So it says please use alternative stations. So this person now receives a text message saying, here he comes, and so, okay, better use another subway station to get there. So this creates a kind of real-time feedback loops that we need in order to manage our systems better. So the future challenge is to come up with systems that enable people. It's not to find a compromise for everyone, where everyone basically needs to make concessions. The city is about creating opportunities for everyone. Very different opportunities. So you can find something that fits your needs, your interests, and so on. So it provides options. And social media are really an important technology in order to organize these options, because opportunities are often opportunities to find people with similar interests, to collaborate with them, to set up projects with them. And that leads us to prosumers. So in the future, we'll not just be passive consumers that buy ready-made products, but we'll start personalizing products. We'll come up with our own ideas and sell them and contribute them actually to the products that we sell. We might come up with our own products with our friends and colleagues and family members and sell them all over the world. All of this becomes possible, and 3D printers actually are one of those enabling technologies that makes it possible. Now, interestingly, self-organization and self-regulation are approaches we can master the complexity of today's systems and benefit from it. But it needs to turn from such a situation of detailed over-regulation towards a situation where we have infrastructures and institutions that help people take the right kinds of decisions, to take better decisions by themselves. And you can see over here in this video that if you just have the right design, then self-organization works out perfectly. So what's special about this design? Well, you have a unidirectional flow from left to right in the front. You have a unidirectional flow from right to left in the back. And in between there is a small buffer that allows the cars or whatever vehicles are there to adjust the speed such that you arrive just at the very moment where you can cross the street because there is a gap for you. So you use the opportunity of gaps, and just a matter of design.
Have you tried that in Zurich?
Sorry, I couldn't resist. Now, interestingly, we can see the trend to decentralized bottom-up approaches everywhere because it is more efficient, it works better. And in fact, classically we have traffic control centers, but new technologies are built on local interaction, like car-to-car communication. We have peer-to-peer money, Bitcoin actually is one, and it has become actually more valuable than gold for some time. We see peer-to-peer lending coming up, and we see that also the peer review system is actually changing towards a more bottom-up quality assessment. We see that taxi stands are replaced by Uber, and we see also that we have more autonomy in terms of driving through self-driving cars, or we see the trend from intelligent robots to intelligent swarms. Now, the dream to create self-regulating systems is very old, 300 years old at least, and you can see here the fable of the bees, in fact published in 1714, exactly 300 years ago, and it was suggesting that our society could work like a beehive, which is perfectly organized. Now, there is a queen bee, but the queen bee doesn't tell all the queens what to do, it just lays eggs. So how does it work, and why does our society work like this? Or does it? Well, Adam Smith also had this idea of the invisible hand, and some people believe in it. But while sometimes self-organization works beautifully, it's not always the case. So, unfortunately, sometimes the invisible hand often fails to do a good job. And environmental pollution is just one example, or overfishing, or climate change. But I'd like to suggest that 300 years later, I mean today, we can now make the invisible hand work, enabled through complexity science and technology, namely the Internet of Things. So we now enter this time, this era of the Internet of Things, where we'll have sensors everywhere in our environment. And those sensors can connect with each other. That allows us to do real-time measurement, but also what is more important than measurement is kind of real-time response. Adaptive feedback becomes possible on a societal level. And here is an example of how it can work in traffic. So at the moment we're simulating this annoying stop-and-go traffic that we still have today. And after we have understood why it's happening, we will turn on a so-called traffic assistance system, and it works as follows. Cars have a radar sensor, and the radar sensor measures distances and relative velocities, and based on that, the cars are driven automatically in a slightly different way than drivers would do that. Well, let's have a look. Okay, these cars that are trying to enter the freeway are producing small perturbations, and those perturbations obviously add up, they're amplifying to create the stop-and-go traffic. Now we'll now switch on the traffic assistance system in a few seconds. Now, well, the inflow stays the same, exactly the same, but you see that after a very short time actually the traffic assistance system manages to get rid of the traffic jam. So, changing the interaction, what we call mechanism design, enabled by real-time information, allows us to solve problems that have been very old. So, self-regulation is resource efficient and resilient. And I'd like to show you another example for city traffic. So, let's compare three ways of organizing a complex system, like a city traffic flow. A classical approach is shown on the left, there's a traffic control authority, and this collects information from all over the city and then tries to come up with an optimal control in real time. But it cannot be in real time because it's an NP-hard optimization problem. It means it takes more computer power than you have, even if you have a supercomputer. So you have to make simplification, but you're trying to do your best. And then you implement your best solution in a top-down way. However, this best solution has actually been created offline for a typical traffic flow, say Monday morning or Thursday afternoon or Friday, or maybe before a soccer game. And this typical situation turns out to be never there exactly. That means your optimal control is optimal for a situation that never occurs, and it's not optimal for the situation that does occur. That's the problem. So let's compare that with a bottom-up self-optimization approach, where every single intersection is strictly minimizing the travel times of those cars approaching that intersection. We call that a homo economics approach because every single intersection just does the best thing from its own perspective. Okay? Then the bottom-up self-regulation on the right is doing the same thing, but with a small difference. It's also looking at what happens to the neighbors. So when a traffic jam grows larger than a certain percentage of the road section, it would first clear this traffic jam to avoid spillover effects. So, what is the outcome? We show here the queue lengths that result as a function of capacity utilization of the intersection. And what you can see is that, of course, as the utilization goes up, top-down regulation will produce larger queue lengths. But well, it seems to do a reasonable job. Now, the selfish optimization, it turns out, is much better. It has much smaller queue length, so it creates this coordination between the traffic flows, as the Adam Smith invisible hand principle would suggest. However, as you can see, that the capacity utilization of a bit more than 0.6, suddenly the queue length is exploding and the whole self-coordination breaks down, it doesn't work anymore. And then, of course, the traffic control center says, ha! This is why we exist, you know, this is why you pay millions in order for us to fix the problem when there's a high capacity utilization. This is exactly when you need us. But, let's see what happens in the area where Adam Smith's invisible hand fails according to the self-optimization approach. If we use the other regarding optimization approach, the self-regulation approach, and it turns out it's better all over the entire range of capacity utilizations. So, if you take care of your impact on your neighbors, then self-organization will do the job. So we can make the invisible hand work. And so let's build this together. As a trustable and user-controlled citizen web. I'm talking about this Internet of Things. And why am I suggesting to do it this way? Well, if a large company would deploy this sensor network all over the world and would control all these data, it could become really a surveillance library. You couldn't do any step without you being watched. Same thing, you couldn't say any word without it being noticed. So the only way to reap the benefits of such a system is building a system that we can trust. And the system we can trust is one that we can manage ourselves, that we can control ourselves. So if we deploy those sensors in our garden, in our house, in our neighborhood that encrypt the data streams and decide ourselves what are the data streams that you're willing to share with your neighbors or with your friends or with everyone, then you're in control of these data. You can feel comfortable about it. And we together would grow this Internet of Things as a global citizen web, and we could all use it together. So it would create benefits for the citizens, for companies, for science, and for politics. I think this is the way to go, and we have started to build it. So there is a Twitter channel. There's not many tweets yet, but NerdNet has started to report about the activities, and there is a GitHub address where you find our first code. And of course, it's not ready, but I'm telling this to you because it requires the citizens and you to contribute to the development of the system in the very same way as OpenStreetMap has been developed, or Wikipedia. So this is the plan, to weave the citizen web as a web of trust. And you can see it's really fascinating. We're creating our own Fab Lab at the moment. We're creating a makers community. And it's so exciting actually to see how this whole thing is moving forward.